Hello and welcome to Turning Point Church. Thanks for coming today and being a part of our worship time together. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there once again. Last week we enjoyed a weekend away and visiting Hannah up in Massachusetts. And today I tested positive this morning for COVID. I got a little sinus drainage. My voice sounds bad, mild fever, and I am otherwise doing just fine. So I'm going to deliver the message today via video, and you can worship and enjoy one another's presence and think about me and pray for me. That would be awesome. So I'm going to take a look here at Exodus chapter 17 story. We're back to seeing Moses and the Israelites in the desert on their way out of Egypt. So we're going back to that story, and here we go. The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink, and so they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" And then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand with you, right there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." And so Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" And then jumping down to verse 15, Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." Well, it was an interesting story. Here we are back with Moses and the nation of Israel on their way out of Egypt, through the desert en route to the promised land. And remember that these people, these Israelites, are covenant people. God made a covenant with Abraham that he would make his people into a great nation, and he was fulfilling that promise. And when the Israelites were suffering as slaves in Egypt, the Lord heard their cries and their groaning of Israel and said, "I have remembered my covenant, and I am coming to rescue my people." And so God delivered them from Egypt miraculously. You remember all the miraculous things that we read about, the plagues and the Red Sea and the silver and gold handed over by the Egyptian neighbors to the Israelites, and they basically plundered the Egyptians as they left untouched and unharmed. And then he fed them miraculously. In our last story, he fed them miraculously using manna from heaven and also quail. When they had no food, God provided their food. And they were to gather as much manna as they needed every day, but keep none for the next day because God would provide for them. And then they left the desert of Sin, and not to confuse that with like sin in the English language, right? They left the desert of Sin and went from place to place as the Lord commanded, and they came to the place that was called Rephidim. Now, in Rephidim, there's another great story that happens here on their way into the promised land. But before the great story happens, there's some trial and suffering. The people become thirsty. I don't know if you ever walked around a desert or not, but if you have, you can become thirsty very quickly. Used to watch like the Bugs Bunny cartoons when I was little, and like there's always somebody like walking through the desert, and Bugs was like singing, "How dry I am, how dry I am, nobody knows how dry I am," right? And I am dry too. See, I got cotton in my mouth. That's what Bugs Bunny said. And so people in the desert, they're thirsty. They're worried about thirsting to death. They're worried about their cattle and their livestock and their children and themselves dying in the desert. A person can go many days without food, but only a few days without water. And so it's a concerning time. There was no water to drink for possibly 2 million people and their livestock. And what do? Well, their reaction is to quarrel against Moses, right? They quarrel against Moses. The scripture says, uh, verse 2, they quarreled with Moses and they said, "Give us water to drink. Now, what's Moses supposed to do? It's not like he has a bunch of bottles of water that he can just hand out, right? Give us water to drink. It's never really been Moses that has delivered them. Moses has only been the conduit in which God provided his deliverance. And so they quarrel to Moses and they say, give us something to drink, Moses. The idea of quarreling here is like complaining or grumbling, giving him a hard time, asking what is he going to do about the fact that they have no water. Verse 3 says they grumbled against him and said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt just to make us thirsty, just to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? It's a great question, right? In other words,